Good afternoon, friends. I trust that we are all okay this afternoon. We thank God for His grace and His mercy, and we thank Him for the gift of life. This afternoon, we are looking at the book of Genesis, chapter 13. We will remember that the last time that we were together, we spoke about Abram leaving the land of Egypt and going back to Canaan. We know that the reason for him to do that was the fact that there was famine in Canaan. So he had to go to Egypt. He and his wife and also his nephew. So we pick up the story from there when they are actually going back to Canaan. So verse 1 says, Then Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him to the south. Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold, and he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai. So we are given a summary of his journey from Egypt to Canaan. We are told that he and his wife and his nephew left Egypt, and went to Canaan, and we are told that they had a lot of livestock, and they had a lot of silver, they had a lot of gold. This means that they worked hard in Egypt to be able to accumulate all these things. And we are told that they went to a place that was between Ai and Bethel, which is a place where Abram had made an altar the first time that he arrived in Canaan. And verse 4 says, To the place of the altar which he had made there at first, and there Abram called on the name of the Lord. And we are told that Abram called on the name of the Lord on that altar that he had built the first time he came to Canaan. He was calling on the name of the Lord. He was thanking God. He was worshiping God for the things that he had done for him. The fact that God had protected him from the time that he left his own country. God had protected him throughout his journey until he got to Canaan. And God had also protected him when he went to Egypt. And this time he has protected him on his journey also back from Egypt to Canaan. So he had reasons to thank God. He had reasons to worship God. He had reasons to call on the name of the Lord. He was grateful, he was thankful for what God had done for him. Do we always do that as God's children? Do we always thank God when he does things for us, when he protects us, when he gives us blessings? Do we remember to thank him? Abraham thanked God for what he had done for him. And we see him here calling on the name of the Lord. And verse 5 says, Lot went with Abram had flocks and herds and tents. So Lot, we know Lot was Abram's nephew. He was Abram's brother's child. Yes, he was Abram's brother's child. So he was Abram's nephew. So he had also a lot of livestock. And this means that they worked hard in Egypt to be able to accumulate these riches, these livestock. They worked very hard. And it is a very important principle. If we work hard, God will bless us. And let's remember that principle. It's an old principle that if we work hard, God will bless us. And verse 6 says, now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. So there was a problem when they came back. They had too many animals, too many herds, too many flocks. The land that they decided to dwell in was not sufficient for the amount of livestock that they had accumulated. So there was a problem. They could not dwell together. And verse 7 says, there were strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. So we are told that the herdsmen for Abram and the herdsmen for Lot, they were constantly fighting because the land had become too small. And we are told also that the Canaanites and the Perizzites also dwelt in the same land. And what it means is that they had also their animals. So the land had become too small. And let's hear what happens in verse 8. Verse 8 says, so Abram said to Lot, please, let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Abram says to his nephew, let's not allow this to happen. Let's not fight. There is no reason for us to fight. I'm your uncle. You are my nephew. So there is no reason for us to fight. There is no reason for our herdsmen to fight. Abram was a wise man. He was a wise man. When he realizes that there is a problem, he calls his nephew and they sit down. They talk about the problem. It is also a principle that we should learn, especially as God's children. When we have disputes, let's call each other and sit down and talk about things and resolve them. Let's not go and gossip about things, but let's sit down and talk about them. That eliminates a lot of problems. And so we see Abram doing a wise thing, calling his nephew, and they sat down and they talked about the problem that they had. And he says that in verse 9, is not the whole land before you? Don't we have this whole land? Why should we be fighting for this small piece of land when we have this whole land that God has given us? And he says to Lot, please separate from me. This was a very good move. Abram sees that this is toxic. He wants to keep their relationship intact. So he says to Lot, separate from me. And he says, when we continue with the verse, he says that if you take the left, then I'll take the right. If you go to the right, then I'll go to the left. He says to Lot, choose where you want to go. When you choose left, I'll choose right. When we go right, I'll choose left. I'll go left. So choose where you want to go. And in verse 10, it says that, and Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, and that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go towards Zoar. And we are told that Lot sees the plain of Jordan as the alternative place, because it was well watered. So he chooses that place. And so we are told in verse 11 that he journeyed east. So they separated from each other. So Abram remained where they were in Canaan. And we are told that Lot journeyed east and dwelt in the plains of Jordan. And God spoke to Abram in verse 14. He says, and the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, lift your eyes now and look for a place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see I give to you and your descendants forever. And I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. God says to Abram, look at this land. The east, the west, the south, the north, you name it. This whole land is yours and your descendants. And your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. So these are the promises that God gives Abram. And we are told in verse 17 that God says to Abram, arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. God says, explore the land, go everywhere. This land is for you. It's yours and your descendants. So see the land. Then in verse 18 says, then Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. What a man! He builds another altar. He worships God. He thanks God for his promises even before he receives them. What a faithful man Abram was. I wish I would be faithful as Abram. May God help me. May God help you to be faithful, to thank him for the blessings that he gives you. And I encourage us to be a people that are wise. God has promised that he will give us anything that we want. If we want wisdom, let's ask for it. May God bless us as we think about this story of Abraham. let's be faithful also, and let's be a people that worship Him, that thank Him, and let's be a people that love Him, that love God with all our hearts, with all our minds, with all our souls. And when we do that, we will keep His commandments. We will listen to Him when He speaks to us. I hope and trust that this message was relevant to you, and I believe that you have learned a lot from this story, as I have learned quite a lot from this story. And my desire is that I would apply the principles that I've learned from here, and I pray that you apply those principles also. Amen.